Hey everybody, Bernakevitch here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca, as well as Neil Bertrando of RT Permaculture. Today we are talking about the Oregon State University Permaculture Design course. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at Assignment 5, taking a look at zones and zonation. Now, zones is not something new. It's something that has been within planning and design for a long time. The way that permaculture takes a look at zones is, however, a little bit unique in that it talks about the center of human initiative, and it talks about the frequency of usage throughout a site. And what's really interesting about those two sort of unique terminologies is that when we talk about center of human initiatives, say you have a public site, you may have a place where the cars are parked, and that's the center of human initiative. Let's say that site grows a little bit, and now all of a sudden you have a tool shed with a central point of water access. Well, now that's probably going to be the center of human initiative. So when you talk about the different zones, from zone 0 being usually the home or the center of human initiative to zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as you've seen in the lectures, you'll see that that all has to do with frequency and intensity of usage. And both Neil and I are big fans of showing frequency of traffic patterns. So be it foot traffic or vehicle traffic or even animal traffic, showing what the frequency is per week or per month, showing 1x per week or 2x per month. So when you do that, again, from an observational standpoint, you really start to see what the site is trying to show you today. Now, that's a really important point, is that the zone assignment is about what the zones are today, not what they will be afterwards. But for a lot of folks who are starting with a bare piece of land, sometimes a piece of land that's already been used or been farmed, the whole piece is usually a zone 5, a zone 4, a zone 3. It hasn't yet changed. So for some of you, the assignment's going to be really easy. For others of you who already have well-used site, you're going to find different zonation. And something that's already been said in the course material, you don't have to have every zone on every site. We're really trying to understand what the frequency of usage is on this site. So I'm going to pass it off to Neil if he has any other tidbits to start off with on zones as a big conversation. And then Neil's going to share a couple of student examples with us.
Thanks, Javan. So Neil Bertrando here, and I'd like to add that I see the combination of the zones and sector maps as a really powerful tool in the permaculture design toolkit. Specifically, I like to think of it as the zones map is the map of the flow of human energy through the site, whereas the sectors map is the map of the flow of all the other energies through the site. And the zone map is one that we have both more control over, as well as something that requires a little bit more self-reflection and observation, which is also a very powerful part of the permaculture concept and applying the observe and interact principle. So as Javan said, I want to emphasize that integrating the pathways onto your zones map is very powerful as a way to visualize how human energy flows through the site. So we want to make sure we identify where both human, pedestrian, and vehicle traffic are going to be on the site, and include those in symbols on your zone map. So I'm going to read quickly through the checklist for this specific assignment, the things that we're going to be grading you on and that we want to see. One is that every area of the map has some zone designation, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to have all the different zones. You don't have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But every area does need to have some designation, because every area has some level of human interaction with it. No interaction would be zone 5. We want the zone designations to make sense based on the level of human interaction with that place. So zone 1, as you've been informed, would be some place you visit every day or multiple times a day. Zone 2 is something like 1 to 2 times a week, sometimes even a little bit more than that, but not every day necessarily. Zone 3 would be 1 time a week to 1 time a month. Zone 4, maybe a few times a year, or for very specific events like harvesting, you might visit it several times over the course of a month, but not much other than that. And then zone 5 is basically either no interaction or wilderness. So just to kind of revisit the zone frequencies and what they are. And then each zone designation has a short description of why. So why have you decided that this current zone designation is accurate for your land. Then the human pathways, including car and pedestrian traffic, are mapped, as I stated. We also want to see your title block with your north arrow indicator, your title, your name, your date, even though it's not listed in the checklist, should be there. Every map that you create should have a date associated with it. And then the final is the quality, which is at the instructor's discretion. So thanks for bearing with me through that checklist. Those are the important pieces that we want to see that we're grading you on, and we'll give you feedback on other stuff you have as well. So do you want to dive into some example assignments now? Okay, great. So I'll share my screen. I've got 2 example assignments here that I'd like to share. Okay, the first one, can you see that? Okay, great. So the first one is a large site. It's a rural site. And as you can see, most of it is zone 5, as Javan has noted. This section of the map doesn't have any on-site roads or human traffic on it. I'd like to see that on this as well, or noted on the side that there currently none exist. But you can see from the map that some do exist. Zone 1, for example, looks like a driveway coming off of the main road. Things that are great about this map are it has a title block, it has a clear legend, scale, and north arrow, all that stuff, as well as notes clearly integrated onto the same slide. So you can see zone 1 clearly is the blue. I can identify that clearly on the map, as well as why it's zone 1. It's used daily for biointensive production. It doesn't have to be an extensive description, but it's very clear. Okay, so zone 2, semi-intensive home production. Zone 3, low-intensive farm zone. I would like to see probably a little bit more description here. Maybe a list of some of the elements that are in the zone, and or what is meant by biointensive production. Because basically at this point, what we're looking for from you is to be thinking and analyzing how human energy is flowing through the site currently. So getting further into description, writing down your thoughts allows you to clarify them a bit, as well as informs us so we can ask clarifying questions and get a better feel for the site, how you're using it currently, and have some ideas about how it might then be used in the future. Okay, so another thing about this assignment that I think was really good is that this site is a large site, so he's then taken it and shown us a detailed map. What I would have liked to have seen on the big picture is a square that shows where the detailed map is going to be. Let's see if I can actually draw it on there a little bit more clearly. Something like this, with included in the legend, the yellow box there. If we include that in the legend, that would be very helpful for me to understand where the detailed map is going to be. Let's see if I can get this. So sorry about that. I'm kind of new to the draw tool on Zoom. I'll do it again here. This looks to me like about where the detailed map is going to be, the green box there. So I'd like to see that in the legend. And so the next, here we are at the closer up zone. Another thing I'd like to see is that the color scheme is exactly the same on both. It's close, but I think the opacity isn't quite the same. So including that would be helpful. But he's got here all the elements that are included down zone 1. So you can see the house, the porch, garden 1, so on and so forth, labeled clearly on the map. So that's also well done. The title block on this one isn't quite as high quality. So it'd be nice to have some consistency in the quality of that. But we can see where the intensity now of human use is in this blue section. It's got some surrounding areas, zone 2, that are nested in there, tightly bound. And then quickly it goes to zone 3 and zone 4 on the site. So there's as a large site, it's got a very clear center of human initiative, and also some big areas that are broader and not as impacted or heavily trafficked by human energy. So that allows us to quickly see how we could be using the site. He's then gone onto a third page and identified notes on the zones in more detail, which is great. This gives me some more detail. I would prefer if this were included on the map. There's a big space here you could fill in notes, and then this could have more detailed notes as well on the larger map, because it's just really distracting to have to scroll back and forth, and our attention gets eaten up by flicking back and forth between different pages with the notes on one page and the actual graphic information on the other. So please include those on the same page if you can. All right, Javan, do you have anything else you'd like to comment on this one?
Yeah, sure, Neil. Can you go back to the large scale map?
You got it.
Thank you. So a couple things here, including your contour lines on your maps is fantastic. Do make sure to put down a legible elevation. The elevations that are here are from a pre-existing map, and the contour detail that he's placed on here or she's placed on here covers over that. So it'd be nice to see a 7200 and a 7100 and just being able to see those quite clearly. I tend to stay away from blue and green for different elements of zones, just because blue really is a convention of water and green really is a convention of vegetation. So I tend to stay out of those two spectrums of colors. I tend to stay in the reds. I tend to stay in the purples, and those are very high contrast colors as well. So that's really easy. Everything ditto to what Neil said. So I think this one's fine. The one thing I did see is that there's a big black square in the middle of the map. And if you do include sort of middle center right, you do include something like this, you do have to place it on the legend. And they have a legend here: property line, contour line, public road. So if this is so important to be here, make sure to put it on. We're also missing the name of the map maker here. So High Pine Permaculture could be the name of the map maker. It could be the site name. There's no delineation there. So usually it's drafted by, created by, rendered by. Neil, if you wanted to go to the small map. Thank you, sir. Everything that Neil said, right on. Lots of space here to add pieces. And as we see here, we only have zone 1, 2, 3, and 4. So doesn't really include a zone 5 because of the scale and the scope. So realize that not all zones are necessary on all maps. Big kudos for this individual for starting to label all the different elements of this site. Really helps us as primary readers to take a look at this and understand it, as well as your classmates and yourself. So it really starts to create a good picture. Thanks, Neil.
You bet. One thing I'm noticing, just I want to highlight for y'all, he does have driveway. I'd like to see an actual path the vehicles take. So he's got footpaths here in the legend. I'd like to see a different color, different line style that shows the vehicle path. And there's footpaths leading off of this map. Ideally this map again would have more clear footpath and vehicle path. Like, it's pretty easy to see that there's some sort of track going up along this section here on the map, right? The switchback. And so is that a vehicle or a foot traffic path? It looks like a vehicle path, because I'm guessing this black box is a building or of some sort. Again, that would help if it were labeled in the legend. So you can quickly get an idea of what we're looking for in a little bit more detail than what this individual provided. But it's also a great example of just clear, clean, crisp zones with some clean descriptions as well. So the next assignment I'd like to look at is another one that's a large site that then has a detail. Many people with larger sites are going to have this sort of scenario. This one I think is phenomenal because they've created both a clear view of the large site, but they're not doing much work on that site. So that's just a smaller map, and then the detail is large, but it's all on one page. So I get an idea about what the site is, what their design area is, and I can look at it and take it all on at once. Also, their descriptions are all on this single page. What this doesn't have, as Javan mentioned on the other one, is it doesn't have a name. So, and it doesn't have a date. Both of those things are important, in my opinion, designed by, drafted by somebody specifically, and then when that happened. And that is important for both archiving and reference, as well as for if someone else is using your map and has any questions, they should go to the person that actually drafted it. This one has lots of little crisscrossing footpaths, as well as a clear vehicle path. The auto traffic is the green line, although their legend doesn't look quite like the line on the map. It looks yellowish to me versus green, so that's something to double check. That's not a huge no-no, but just something to pay attention to and double check. But it's easy to see where the vehicles can go, where the footpath and traffic are. I'd like to see, again, it looks like there's some dirt roads. Are those vehicle or foot roads? There's this trail that's lined out. Is that a vehicle or foot trail or both? Some clarification on that is really good at this point, because it allows us to really understand and analyze how energy can flow through the site from a human and vehicle perspective, where you can haul materials, where people are moving frequently, which gives us good ideas about how to site different elements. based on the current use of human energy and or how we might want to change that. I also really like his description. You see includes a zone 0, which is the living structures. I personally just advocate for putting this in zone 1, but some people find it's a good tool to use a zone 0, which is inside the center of human initiative. This side I like because it's got several locations that are centers of human initiative. And then he's grouped them all into one large zone 1 where people frequently are. This is a complex site because it's a community with many people living on site, students going to school, also people traveling and entering the site daily for work. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think he's done a very good job of organizing the complexity of information in something very straightforward. I also like that he's listed in his description, for example, zone 1, daily interaction, right? So that it's daily. Spaces for play, work, and relaxation. And then he lists some of the elements: gardens, chickens, that sort of stuff that staff need to visit multiple times a day. Let's look also at, like, zone 5, for example. You can see it up here on the large map as well as on the detailed map. Those are native areas that people just go to visit to see nature. I'm wondering how often, for example, this nature trail is used in zone 3. It says lower nature trail and art studio visited weekly. So that, when I look at it, I wonder, and then clearly it's labeled in the legend and the description. So that allows me to quickly understand, okay, this is something that people maybe do on the weekend, or there's some sort of weekly class where they go out on the nature trail or something like that. So overall, I think it's really well done. You can see that the zones kind of radiate outward. Zone 3 creeps in on zone 1 in a couple locations. Zone 4 is butted right up against zone 1, which is their tree farm area. And zone 2 kind of surrounds it with a lot of kind of high use areas like courts, pool and pavilion, stuff like that. So lots of different uses on this site, existing uses, which is very, again, a complex set of information that's conveyed easily and clearly in a single page. So great work. And Javan, any comments?
So a few things I would say here is that they've done a great job of labeling, but the way that they've labeled whatever program they've used, there's a lot of layers. And so I would have thrown the labels at the top layer, so that way everything stood out. All the zone labels stand out, but the different labels of the different structures are underneath different layers. And that's where you get color differentiation, as Neil pointed out. So the obviously the auto traffic has been put under a few layers, so it changes color. Those types of things I would bring out to the front. I'm going to hit the nail on the head again on this. Blue and green, leave them alone. Stick with other colors because it really does start to change the mind and push the mind in a specific direction. Although not necessary for Neil and I, especially for me. This is definitely the pot calling the kettle black. You don't have to spell check your documents, but it definitely helps. I'm pretty sure those plum trees in the northwest corner aren't necessarily trees that are purely plum. I'm guessing they're fruit trees. So one of those things just to keep in mind is that you want to keep the professionalism of these as high as possible. That being said, as I've told many people in my group, I am not a grammar person or a spelling person, but some small mechanical errors can start to take away from the legibility of the map. Thanks for this one, Neil. This is a great one.
You bet. Yeah. One final thing I do want to point out is that on the bottom left corner here, where my cursor is, you can see that there's a strip of zone 1 coming up to their center and their design area, and that's a driveway. And I think this is a valuable thing to consider, is that both vehicle and foot traffic areas that are driven on or traveled daily are zone 1s, and a lot of times there will be these strips or kind of like linear paths through the other zones of zone 1, which are very interesting edges to work with from a design standpoint. So I encourage you to look for those and make sure to call those out on your maps.
Hey, Neil, your other examples are still computer generated, yes?
Both of these examples are computer generated, yes.
Right. Do you have another example, or is this it?
I do not. Those were the two that I have.
Okay, awesome. I think what I'll do is I'll share an example that's excuse me, share an example that is not computer generated. Just kind of helps to show the conversation from a non-computer generated conversation. You can see this here, Neil?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, awesome. So we've seen this student's work before. Again, this is a student who already has drawing in their background, but with stencils and with a little bit of time, it's nothing anybody can't copy. It's really easy to copy this type of style and situation. So a couple of things that we've seen in the other ones that both Neil and I picked up on, all of the zone descriptions are right on this map. And I really appreciate that. It allows me to take a look and to assess and to understand. Second thing, the vehicle traffic, the pedestrian traffic, both of those are well labeled, easy to see, easy to understand. Zones as well, easy to understand. This individual decided to go with a pure legend as opposed to also putting the zones over top of the different zones themselves. So the labeling, I like both personally. It just allows me to see it really quickly, especially if your coloring is a little different, and it's very difficult to get identical coloring when you're working with pencil crayons. With computer generated, it's easier, but again, we already saw that overlapping issue. So interesting to see those two pieces. I like that they included a note and a traffic flow. So current zone for the site are based entirely on the amount of traffic and interaction from the family living on property. Functional use of space was not considered in this analysis. So great to see that level of detail, something I really appreciated about this one. Neil, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah. One thing I noticed right away is that the human traffic pathways into the house locate the doorways on the house. So, and the other buildings as well have doorways located. I think that's a really powerful thing. I encourage you to include that as soon as possible, both on your base map as well as on your zones map, because where you go into and out of a house is going to dramatically impact how you interact with the site. So thanks for zooming in. You can see where those doors are. He also shows gates and stuff like that between the shed and the house. So these are really powerful, simple things to include in your map, which will improve your understanding of your site and your communication of the human flow of energy through the site to the rest of the people looking at the map. Additionally, what's not shown on here, I think you mentioned that in the notes, is something that you can do, is do a layout for your house. What are the different locations of the different rooms? Because how you enter the house and what types of rooms are associated with those entry, like is there a foyer from the door on the top, or is there like a mud room from the door on the back by the shed and the paving? Well, those sorts of things will affect what type of activities you're going to be doing right before and after you're entering and exiting the house. So and also if you have, for example, your bedrooms or your kitchen with windows drawn onto the map, that will also help you understand more about how you interact with the site, what you're going to be looking out the different windows, all those sorts of things, how you're letting light into different rooms depending on how you use them in different times of year. So all those things add to communicating the site to others, as well as to improving your personal understanding of the flow of human energy through the site and how it interacts with the other site elements.
Great pieces, Neil. Thank you so much for those. Those are amazing. I'm going to show you one more example here that I think is an important one. And it's only because in this situation, this is a group situation. This is a public park. And this individual did a little bit above and beyond what we've asked you to do, but they had to do it to understand their site. So this is a site in Calgary, Alberta. And it's a site that, again, coloration, little muddy. I'm not crazy about this. They've also added current zone. We already know it's the current zone, not necessary. They've done a good job with larger conversations here, larger descriptions. But one thing they did do, because this was a park, is they went and they did some observations. So they sat and they watched this over a couple of periods of time just to see what was going on. They then went out to the park, to the people around the community, put up a Google form and created a survey to ask, when you use the park, which parts do you use? And they actually started to map that graphically to show and to understand where the park was used. Was it the picnic tables? Was it the playground? To really understand from the people who were using the park what that usage was like. So if you're using a public site, a site where you don't necessarily have all the information and you have to go and find the people who have this type of information, this could be a very useful tool to go out and start to understand your site. It's a really interesting conversation, one that I'm really glad to see that somebody took the initiative to work with and use. Neil?
Yeah, this is great. It reminds me of a tool that I often recommend for people to do even on personal sites, which is print out a map and walk around and see where you go frequently. Look at where clutter or tools and materials and stuff just pile up that don't get paid attention to a lot of times. You can start to do a more detailed site analysis and investigation and take some notes and draw those on the map, and that will, I think, facilitate translating that into a zone map or a digital or hand-drawn document. So I really encourage you to print something out, walk around, take notes on it, and get to know your site through observation. And can you scroll back down to the actual map itself? So the thing that pops out immediately to me on this is that it's not in a direct overhead view. It looks like it's kind of tilted in the slight perspective. And I would say that's great for something like a presentation, but from a mapping standpoint, I want to see something that's either in direct overhead bird's eye view or in some sort of cross section, which is a vertical slice through the property. One of those two things, those are standard mapping and drafting methods and views. So let's try to keep stuff in those standards. And if you're going to use a perspective drawing to communicate something, that's great. I just wouldn't do it for a specific map of this site.
Great points. Great points. The last thing I'll point out here is they had both human winter movement and human summer movement. Great differentiation. A place like Calgary that gets a lot of snow at times. Great to see the difference between the two, because now you understand the seasonal usage of the site. So I was glad that they placed that in here. Of course, things that are missing, the title of the site is missing, the map maker is missing, a few things that are missing on this. And so part of our objective within these assignments and these videos is to show you the things that are missing, and hard to find an assignment that has everything we want. So hopefully this helps to convey all the things we want, so that way you can level up your game during this course, because really that's the biggest objective. It's not the certificate at the end of the course, although it might be a thing that you need or somebody else needs. Very rarely do I find anybody else needs that certificate. You really want to increase your design game and your conversation about observation, your conversation about rendering. And so all of these videos are about upping your skills and upping your scale of observation and then your rendering. So just keep that in mind as we go throughout. Neil, do we want to show a few more? I think we're kind of running long on this video. Maybe we'll call it there.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, folks. So we've been talking about zones, zonation, centers of human initiative. And as Neil said, it's really about zones being the human influences in the sectors that are coming throughout. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you at the next video.